him in sooner. Stephen Yates is a former Deputy Assistant to the Vice President for National Security Affairs and CEO of DC International Advisory. Stephen, thank you for taking the time to join us today. What about these questions being directed toward the FBI? The FBI, usually a highly regarded and pretty popular agency on Capitol Hill. But there are questions being asked by some very important members of Congress saying, we apparently had a heads up that Tamerlan Tsarnaev may have been involved in some shady stuff. The FBI talked to him, investigated, and cleared him. What do you think about that?
Well, indeed, there are a number of very, very important questions that come out of this, and I think there are two major areas that need to be revisited. Investigators indeed did a very quick job of taking down the two suspects, but it seemed to have started from a cold start, and one wonders why that may have been the case if it was. The other is, will we ever get any information from the younger suspect that leads us to future acts or other organizations that remain active? And I think the way this was carried out leaves those as gaping questions. But how someone who had been on a watch list or had been investigated, had a younger brother receive permanent residency so soon is a major, major question on a number of levels that goes beyond the FBI.
When you say this thing started from a cold start, you're referring to the fact that, in your view, the FBI should have at least had some kind of a list, a reminder file, something that would have said, aha, bombs at the marathon, where's Tamerlan Tsarnaev?
Well, in the wake of 2001 and the 9/11 tragedy, there were a lot of mechanisms put in place to gather a wider net of intelligence and to try to have the federal government cooperate more with local authorities to provide security at major public events. We're obviously very concerned. If these guys had been watched, even if just one of them had been watched before, you would think that we would continue to monitor any communications they had with overseas actors. There are a lot of things under the Patriot Act and other kinds of surveillance that you think might have continued. So I guess the biggest question many of us would have now is, have counterterrorism tools weakened in an era where we thought that the tide of war was receding?
There are no full body scans or TSA pat-downs via the internet. And it seems that these days a lot of communication with agents in this country, witness Nidal Hassan, for instance, are taking place via the internet.
There's no doubt there's a lot of radicalization, planning, and other kinds of activity that's going on by the internet. And of course, everyone knows the internet isn't a sovereign space. You can be anywhere in the world and still have an effect anywhere else in the world. And it's one of those major areas where I'm sure our intelligence agencies work very, very hard. And our laws at home may not be up to speed with what our national security needs are while we're trying to preserve a relatively free society.
It appears that these two brothers were the only ones involved in the actual bombing and then all of that crazy aftermath, the shootouts with police and so forth. But what about a wider support structure? I mean, who paid for all of this?
Yeah, well, obviously we need to know a lot of these kinds of answers. I think it's just very implausible that these two operated in isolation. Even if you just take the simple notion that they seem to have planned very methodically how to get there, but somehow escape didn't work at all as if there was a plan, which leads some to wonder maybe they were just directed by others and left basically to die by whoever helped try to put them in place. That would be consistent with a surprise Times Square attempted bomber who thought it ought to work, consistent with an underwear bomber who seemed surprised it didn't work. It seems to me that a lot of signals that these guys were unlikely to have operated alone, and we need to know whether there are others operating to perpetuate further attacks.
Stephen Yates, who knows quite a bit about intelligence and security out of Washington. Stephen, thank you.
Thank you.